Good afternoon and welcome to Mountain Minds Monday, a program of Tahoe Silicon Mountain. This is the March 22 edition, as you can tell from my shamrock scarf. Tahoe Silicon Mountain is a nonprofit here in Truckee. We've been around doing a flagship speaker series for the last 12 years, the second Monday of the month. That's Mountain Minds Monday. And we are thinking about going back to in-person. So any feedback on that would be welcome as we start planning for returning to in-person in May or June. We also have a monthly program called First Friday at 4. It has also been on hiatus during the pandemic. It's an entrepreneurs roundtable, and we're looking forward to welcoming that back soon as well. Like I said, the second Monday of the month, our April topic is still being finalized. So that means it's time to sign up for announcements. Sign up for an email newsletter to learn what's coming up next, our Facebook group to be able to join in with the community and have a conversation, and certainly subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you'll get notified just as soon as we go live with the next speaker. Oh, just a point of information, bit.ly links are case sensitive. We do have a suggested donation of $5 for our remote events. The best way to make that donation, just go to TahoeSiliconMountain.com, and in the upper right-hand corner, there is a yellow donate button. And the reason for that is we are an official 501c3. Your donations are tax deductible, and we have quite a few overhead items, even as a small organization, associated with bookkeeping, tax filings, technology subscriptions, and some of our social media support. Other than that, we are an all-volunteer board and all-volunteer organization, and we are looking to round out more spots on our board. So if you have interest, please reach out. We're always looking for more volunteers. I'd like to thank our sponsors that also help make this possible. Our gold sponsor is Holland & Hart. They've been our gold sponsor for a very long time. They're our longest sponsor. They're a law firm with offices here in Truckee. Holland & Hart strive to lead their profession by giving the highest level of service and loyalty to their clients and by forging a team. Lawyers, paralegals, staff, and other professionals whose work is infused with their values. The founders' philosophy was simple: keep going up, and if you get stuck, there's always another route to the top. This is where the spirit of the firm's pioneering and innovation began. Our silver sponsor is also a law firm. Mobo Law is a full-service law firm started in Truckee. Mobo Law provides excellent representation in an approachable, responsive environment with a human touch. The firm is comprised of attorneys and support staff with integrity and a solid work ethic, providing exceptional work that truly benefits their clients. They love their work and it shows. We'd also like to thank several community organizations that have been great supporters of ours: Nevada County Tech Connection, Tahoe Truckee Media, the Truckee Tahoe Airport, Lyft Workspace, where we're broadcasting from this evening, and the Truckee Chamber of Commerce. You too can become a sponsor of Mountain Minds Monday and Tahoe Silicon Mountain. Here's a bit.ly link or sponsorship at TahoeSiliconMountain.com. And without further ado, we're going to get on to the main event. Donner Party Relief Expedition Trekkers will be answering your questions about extraordinary feats. So just by way of background, in 1847, Valentine's Day 1847, a group of 7 rescuers set out from Johnson's Ranch near Wheatland, California, to rescue the Donner Party trapped at Donner Lake. On Monday, February 14th of this year, 4 ultra-distance runners set out in an attempt to recreate the route the rescuers used to reach the Donner Party and to honor the heroes who saved their fellow pioneers. We're going to hear the stories of these 4 adventurers and historic trail trekkers: Bob Crowley, Tim Tweetmeyer, Jennifer Hemmen, and Elk Rimmer, as they traveled roughly 100 miles from Johnson's Ranch to Donner Lake in 5 days. The team will discuss the research and findings that went into determining the rescue route, as well as the challenges of the journey itself. In a previous statement, they said, the project is about the will to survive and bring back those left behind. Our team will honor the grit, determination, and selflessness of the 7 rescue members. It's about people risking their lives to save others. So the 2 who will be sharing with us tonight, Bob Crowley is an amateur ultra distance runner and historian with an appreciation for American Western history and epic adventure tales. He's endeavoring to combine all these passions to help bring history to life. He coined history trail trekking. And Tim Tweetmeyer is an ultra distance runner and an engineering manager at Hewlett Packard Enterprise in Roseville. He's best known for his 5 victories and unprecedented 25 sub 24-hour finishes at the 100-mile Western States Endurance Run. He has also qualified and participated as an age grouper at the Ironman World Championships in Kona. So without further ado, let's turn it over to Bob and Tim. Looking forward to your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Ellen. That is a wonderful introduction. And we are going to, Tim and I are going to kind of do a pictorial of sharing tonight. Can you see the screen?
Yeah, I can see it, Bob.
Okay, great. So thanks everybody for coming. And we're going to actually walk you through the 5 days of our expedition using photos and videos. It's probably the most fun way to experience what we experienced and tell the story of the relief parties along the way. So without further ado, this is the map. And we started at Johnson's Ranch back here near Wheatland, and about 100 miles to the excuse me, to the east was the lake at Donner Lake and the cabins there. And of course, many of you know further on, the Donners wintered up at Alder Creek. So what Tim and I had to do was discover the trail. The Donner Party Relief were on foot for the most part, and they took a slightly modified route to the Overland Trail, which most people know. So we spent years researching the Forlorn Hope first, and then moved over to research this trail, and had to spend probably half our time in the field, the other half reading primary research and comparing notes and eliminating options, and ultimately came up with this path, which we think is probably about 85% accurate. So we're going to get going. And before we dive in, we do want to mention that most all the photography tonight is from Keith Sutter. Secondarily, there is some footage from Austin Tweetmeyer, Tim's son, who did a terrific job of embedding with us for many of the more difficult spots. But Keith is a past National Geographic photographer. You'll see the work that he's done. He's a wonderful guy. And he's also an adventurer himself. As most of these adventure photographers are, they have to be as good as the people they're filming, if not better, because they have the 50-pound of gear on their back as they're filming climbers or the kinds of things that we do. So how did we get here? And I thought, Tim, maybe you could talk a little bit about, what we're going to go through, and then how we ended up here.
Yeah, so I mean, it's this thing, a whole series of expeditions that Bob and I, the 2 that we've done, started way back when we got interested in the Donner Party, based on some books that we'd read, and we run together on a Tuesday night. And that's us on the top of Squaw, looking down into the throat of the Middle Fork of the American River in the Western States course. This is just another day where we were out, wandering around in the mountains, trying to figure out where things were, and kind of enjoying the backcountry. Both the ladies, Elka and Jen, and ourselves love being outdoors, love being outside in the mountains. And so we spend a fair amount of time, and we love trails, and particularly ones that we've never seen before. And we might know they're out there, but getting around. So if you haven't read this book, I'd highly recommend it. Daniel James Brown wrote several great books so far. Boys in the Boat, Under a Flaming Sky, this one, The Different Stars Above, and he just came out with a new book I haven't had a chance to read yet, but this was kind of the one that hooked us around the Forlorn Hope. But it also is a kind of more of a way of bringing the Donner Party with a little bit of modern research. He does a great job of knitting those 2 things together, which is kind of what got us going. Bob and I started talking on Tuesday night runs, like, hey, maybe we should go do that. Check it out. This is our collection of reading material. And all kinds of, some of this is original content, some of it's almost fictional, but you have to read it all, and then you have to go out there and see it on foot. And that's where kind of Bob and I and Jen and Elka spend our time trying to reconcile what they're telling us in these books with what we see on the ground. If you look at that book in the bottom right-hand corner, the Truckee Trail and Nevada City Road book, that's the Trails West book that kind of shows there's markers all along the trail every 5 to 10 miles. And you can kind of tell whether you're on the path, but in between those markers is always an adventure. And that's where we had to spend our time on the weekends before we did this trip, is connecting up these markers and the stories that we'd read in all of these books to make sure that we were going in the right direction and experiencing what these rescue people had experienced.
So let me just give you a 3-minute summary of the Donner Party. We've learned from the best. Frank Mullen, who joined us last year when we were with you all, is a noted scholar of Donner and also author. He does it best. He knows how to get through the Donner Party story in no time flat. So he challenged us, and here we go in 3 minutes. Manifest Destiny, mid-1800s, declared by all the politicians in the East that really we ought to have all the territory that's in the continent of the now North American United States. And so the notion was, let's make the land available for free, and let's encourage people that are living mostly in the Midwest to head out west for more fertile land, more of the land, free and great weather, and settle there. And while they're doing that, oh, by the way, we'll be going through Native American territory. They'll be fine. They'll enjoy the visitors. And when we get to the other end, it's owned by Mexico, but don't worry about that. So off everybody went. And of course, along the way, it's about 2,000 miles from St. Joe's, Missouri, which is the hopping off point. They travel all the way across, and it was immigrant after immigrant, beginning in probably 1844 were the first with wagon trains, and then right around the time of the Donner Party, 1846, it was picking up to where you'd have literally thousands of wagon trains out there on the trail at the same time. You can see here's Independence and St. Joe's. They followed the Platte River, and needless to say, they took the easiest routes possible. So they followed rivers, and here they went up to Fort Bridger. And at Fort Bridger, it was a decision that they had to make, whether they took the purple route, which went up to Oregon, the old Oregon Trail, the green route, which was the traditional route to head west, or this red route. And that red route is called the Hastings Cutoff. And the Donner Party were one of the first pioneers to decide, we're going to take this, quote, shortcut that's supposed to save us 3 weeks. They were falling a little bit behind. And so they jumped on this trail and very quickly found it was a mess. It actually wasn't a trail at all. And they had to stop and build a trail in order to get across. They ended up 80 miles across the desert. Most of their animals were lost along the way because of that. And ultimately, the damn if you do, damn if you don't, is they get over here. And this is the Ruby Mountains, those of you that know Nevada. And they get to the Ruby Mountains, go, we can't go through those. And so they had to go all the way around the Ruby Mountains as the last terrible act before they rejoined up here at the Green Trail. They lost 3 weeks. They didn't gain 3 weeks, and it put them severely behind. That then got them to the camp late. And when they got to the foot of Truckee Lake at the time, Donner Lake now, they were right on the edge of the end of October. Still should have had time to be able to get up over the pass, but there was an early snow. And as the story goes, they tried over and over again to go up and over the pass. They couldn't do it. The snow held them back, and they ended up having to winter here at the lake. A Murphy cabin was built. The Breen cabin was taken over from the Schallenberg, who had built it in 44, and the Graves, about 2 miles out here near Truckee High School, built their cabin. And then the Donners were out here because their wagon broke down, and they never were able to rejoin up with the rest of the gang. So they were 6 miles up this way. So they got scattered, and they got trapped. And that's really where our story begins as to, well, what happened after they got trapped and how did they get out of there and who saved them? Tim, you want to take this one?
Sure. So they arrive at the lake. Let's just call it November 1st. It's a nice round time. They probably got there a day or two earlier at the end of October, and made, as Bob mentioned, several attempts to get over the pass and couldn't. So they finally decided that what they had to do was build snowshoes to get through and bust through the snow and go get help. People were starting to really wither away. And just before this Forlorn Hope group left on December 16th, 1846, the first person died at the lake. So they knew things were falling apart. So this group of 15 set out from the lakes on snowshoes, thinking that it would be a week, maybe 10 days at the most, to make it all the way to Johnson Ranch. Somewhere they thought it was 70, 75, maybe 80 miles. It turned out to be quite a bit longer than that. And this is the trip that we did a year and a half ago, retracing the Forlorn Hope route from Donner Lake through what is right now the Lang Road off-ramp near I-80. Where you see there, Bob, saying where it says wrong turn, that's where the Forlorn Hope went awry. Rather than taking the immigrant route, they ended up turning south and ending up in the North Fork of the American River, which is really a really bad mistake. If they'd just gone over the little hump there at Emigrant Gap, like you see on the highway, they would have dropped right into the Bear Valley. The Bear River flows all the way from Bear Valley directly to Johnson's Ranch. All you have to do is follow the river along the ridge above it, down through Colfax, down through Auburn, and ending up what is just east of Wheatland and west of Campfire West today. So they went out thinking it was going to be a week to 10 days. It took them 33 days to make it to Johnson Ranch. Along the way, several people perished, both at the Camp of Death over near Colfax, and only 7 made it. All 5 women and 2 men were able to make it to Johnson Ranch. And the important part here was they started the first relief. It was them arriving at Johnson Ranch that alerted the immigrants that had made it over the pass that it was time to rally the troops and go back and save them, because people didn't know that they were trapped back there, and then they didn't know that they were in really dire straits. Like Bob mentioned, they'd lost most of their animals in the desert coming across Nevada, such that when they got to Donner, they didn't really have much with them. This is a picture of us arriving at Johnson Ranch back in December of 2020, I guess it would be now. It's kind of a humbling walk. Those are the wagon ruts from the wagons that came through. There was 100 wagons a day coming through to Johnson Ranch. So we had finished that trip at the Adobe, which is where William Eddy made it. And one of the things we do when we do these trips is we try to, kind of put ourselves in the personalities and also the footsteps of these pioneers. In this case, and the one we did just recently, we take what we call tribute cards with us. And that's what we laid down at the foot of the Adobe house that was at Johnson Ranch. And for each one of those people that had started on the Forlorn Hope, we know 7 made it, but this was the entire group finally rejoined at where they were all hoped had been back in 1846 and 47. So we had finished that trip. It was wow, it's hard to describe that one. That's a whole other one that we've done here before. And it took us a while to decompress from that. And then we started, well, what else, is left to do here? And that's when we started thinking of the relief expedition. So a little intro on that is, once they arrived at Johnson Ranch, the idea was to take food back to the lakes. But now you're talking right smack in the middle of winter. The snows were 25 to 30 feet. And they were going to have to go the uphill direction at a time when the weather was going to be just as extreme, if not worse, than what the Forlorn Hope group had persevered through. So the local immigrants rallied the troops. They got the beef ready, ground some flour and loaded up the animals and started out in the first relief. I want to say February 4th. Is that that right, Bob? They started February 4th, headed up to the lake. We started on the 14th, and we were hoping to arrive exactly the same day that the relief party arrived at Donner Lake 175 years later. And one of the fun things we did on this round that we didn't do on the Forlorn Hope was we decided to leave Johnson Ranch and arrive at Donner Lake with period clothing. We didn't do the middle section of it that way. That would have been a little troublesome with the footwear. But as you can see, this was our getup. Our costume designer was generally Jen and Bob. And Jen did a lot of the shopping, and you can see we all kind of tried to weather our clothes or distress our clothes, as they call it. So it would look like it had been across the mountains and was about ready to go back. So this is us standing at Johnson Ranch, ready to go. One thing that we did this round was we each took on a character, a personality with the trip. So I was representing John Pierce Rhodes, who had come across with his family and was at Johnson Ranch when the Forlorn Hope arrived. And Bob, I'll let you take your character.
Mine was John Stark. He was in the 3rd and 4th relief, and infamous for the fact that he volunteered when no one else would, and they offered to pay him money, and he said, "No, that's not right. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do." And he later on went and found a number of the folks that were being saved stuck at a place called Starve Camp. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And most of them were children. And his colleagues wanted to leave and said, "Look, we'll take one child each. That's all we can handle. We're going to have to leave the rest behind." And John Stark said, that's not going to happen. He said, "Our charge is to take them all. So you can go, but I'm going to put them all on my back if I have to, and I'm going to carry them out of here." And he literally did. He was a huge man, and he put about 9 children. He'd carry them for 200 yards and then go back and get the next one, sit them down in the snow. And he did that for about 3 days before he got help. So a really stellar character. This is a picture of what was our live tracker. Each blue dot represented a signal that was sent out every 10 minutes from our tracker up to the satellite. And we had, we had quite a few people following us online live over the 5 days. And so they would be able to get updates and see this. And this was a 3D map, and they could tip it and look at where we were. And we were reporting some pictures as we went along the way. But people really enjoyed following along with us. And it's actually one of the highlights that we have. The next thing, we're going to play a video. Hopefully the audio will be okay for you. And it's the news channel from ABC News Channel from Reno came out and did a very nice little piece on the front end as we left, and also on the back end. And we're going to play that front end here just because they do a nice job of summarizing what we were up to.
For 175 years, it's been the source of horror stories and bad jokes about cannibalism. In fact, that judgment began almost immediately in the first feverish accounts of what had happened to a group of pioneer families caught by early winter storms near a lake that now bears the name of their party.
All of the horrors that we think of the Donner Party really were secondary to the bravery and the absolute effort that these people made to get here, and the effort they made to keep each other alive.
It's true they left late, relied on bad information, and in the end suffered from a combination of unsteady leadership and bad luck. But Rosen says they did the best they could under the worst of circumstances.
Mothers and fathers keeping their children alive, families holding together, strangers going for help and coming back with food. I mean, it's really a very good story.
It's the search for the full story that brought this group of people to a ranch and walnut orchard outside the Northern California town of Wheatland at dawn this morning. The land I'm standing on contains as much California and American history as just about any in the West. At the height of the Western migration, the Johnson Ranch was its busy terminus, the first civilization after a 1,000-mile trek from Wyoming. And it was here on January 17th, 1847, that the first survivor of what would be called the Forlorn Hope Party stumbled out of the wild to sound the alarm. People were dying in camps up in the Sierra. And it was from here that the first relief party would depart 3 weeks later. This morning, 4 experienced backwoods trekkers, each wearing a period costume in a moment, and assuming the character of one of the members of the relief parties that would follow, would retrace their steps. 2 years ago, the same four reenacted the escape of the Forlorn Hope Party and did it for the same reasons.
There's no better way to, have history brought to folks than to actually do it.
Like the original relief party, they will soon abandon their horses and mules and continue on foot. They have modern gear and better weather, but it's not a trip to be taken lightly. And that's the point.
It becomes pretty emotional at certain points throughout the trip when you realize the certain historical significant places that they went through, what occurred there. And it just becomes who you are and whatever suffering you're doing trying to get through your day.
They put themselves in harm's way. They put their lives at risk to help strangers. And they did it because they thought it was the right thing to do.
If all goes according to plan, they will emerge Friday, the 175th anniversary, when Hope arrived at the Donner Party camp. At Johnson Ranch near Wheatland, California, Ed Pierce, Coloway News Now.
So there we are heading out, and we were fortunate enough to have contacts with both mules, which they would have had for pack animals, as well as the horses. And fortunately, all of us have had some experience with the horses, so it wasn't too uncomfortable. And we rode them out off the property. And then, Tim, I'll let you take over from here in terms of what we're doing and then what we did next.
Yeah, those two mules were my Jack and Jill. They were great. It was kind of cool to walk off just as the relief party would have walked off when they left back in 1847. They had a bunch of 15 that left, including the animals with them, trying to take as much provisions as they can. So this is us exiting Johnson Ranch. As soon as we got off the property, we changed back into our normal running and backcountry clothes. As it was going to be a long day with 100 divided by 5 is 25 miles a day, and we had to kind of front load that due to the how bad it could be at the end if we had any poor weather or bad conditions in the snow. This is us crossing through Camp Far West. The trail actually went right through Camp Far West, but it's a little tricky to do that now, and goes around the back roads between Camp Far West and Auburn. This is us kind of wandering around back off of Camp Far West Road, and then out onto the roads that connect back to the backside of Auburn near Wolf Road. But you kind of get the conditions here. It's just kind of old dirt roads and winding around, no cars, just really pretty backcountry. It's out here where Bob had a little mishap, tripped on one of the roads, kind of slowed us down a little bit. We had to put him back together, but this is kind of what you see. This is a sign that's out on Perimeter Road on the backside of the Nazier Winery. And it's, you're getting out in the middle of nowhere when you go by this sign, because the road goes from pavement to dirt, and pretty much there's no services for a while. Bob and I almost ran out of gas out here when researching the Forlorn Hope. This was some of the obstacles we got through in the first day. We had to sneak through Nazier Vineyards, and thankful to them that they let us go through, but we didn't realize the gate was going to be closed, so we had to do scaling of a few fences to get through. Luckily, nobody was injured. This is one of the T markers that you see out there along the trail, and this goes all the way out into the middle of Nevada. This is called the Truckee River Route, or the Truckee Trail. Started out in the Humboldt Sink in the middle of Nevada and finished at Johnson Ranch. It's well over, 150, 160 miles. And what you have on these markers is they generally point the direction of the trail. And then on each marker, there's a quote from a pioneer that came through in the late 1840s or early 1850s that gives you an idea what the conditions were like. So it's kind of fun to go by and read each one and see what they were experienced as they went along. This is out on Wolf Road. This is a sign out on Brewer Road on our way to the finish of the last day. By this time, we're at about 4 o'clock, 4:30 at night. So you can see the sun starting to go down. There's 2 of those signs along Brewer Road, which is, we had found those scouting that out, but it is funny how when you do this trail, you find these things you'd never seen before. We didn't know this sign was there when we did our early homework for Forlorn Hope. And we found several different signs along the way, you'll see later on here. So we finished our first night kind of on the backside of Auburn. It was about 30 miles on the road, and we camped on the driveway and front lawn of a guy that we know that lives out near the backside of Alta Sierra. So that was day 1. So I'll let you pick up day 2, Bob.
You got it. So bright and early, we usually get up around 5:30 and had some breakfast. We had to pack up, all of our winter gear, and we did hand it to a crew. We weren't carrying it on our backs. We were giving it to somebody that had a Jeep, and they'd move it to the next spot. But we did definitely stay outdoors the whole time. That was part of the deal. And again, as we went along what we think the route is, we continue to encounter signs that were along the way. This one, you can see it's broken. It was kind of leaning up against a tree, put there, don't know when, but marking that, yeah, you're on the overland trail. And so it always was reassuring to us as we came across these signs that we must be at least partially right.
No
We
spell
also-
checker on that sign there. No spell
Yeah.
checker.
Yeah, right.
Whoever built that sign.
Yeah.
That was early in the morning too. Yeah.
We got up to Chicago Park near Rollins Reservoir, and there a lot of things are named after Donner because the Donner Path comes literally right behind you. You can see it comes right on down through there, and so there's the Donner Trail fruit stand, and there's a couple of other hotels and things. But ultimately, we had to get to Rollins Reservoir, which of course wasn't there in 1847. So we did want to stay as true as we could to the route. So we hitched a ride with a raft. And these are a couple of our friends that met us and paddled us for 5 minutes, literally across the reservoir so we could stay on trail. And then we had to climb up this steep embankment. You can see Tim going up here. It was fine. It was really just, we were very, very fortunate to have permission for a lot of these folks to let us cross some private land. And in some cases, we had to go around and take the roads, and that's fine too. But this was a case where we got to go actually on the trail. And son of a gun, we get to the top, and there it is again, Old Immigrant Trail. This is a real road. It turns into a dirt road, and it is called that because it was the Old Immigrant Trail. And so we ended up following that route into what we call Steep Hollow, which we'll talk extensively about here in a minute. But most importantly, Tim had his daily lunch. And I'm not even going to try to explain what he's eating there. He can tell you, but he eats it every day.
That's a trail butter burrito.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good
Yeah.
stuff.
It's been called a lot of other things too. We'll just leave it at that. Now, this is standing right on that old Immigrant Trail ridge, and we're looking west here. So this is looking back towards Rollins Reservoir. You can see the glistening of the water there in the background, and the major PG&E power line that's cutting through there. And then this is standing in the same spot. We just turned around 180 degrees and looking east. And there, it was really for the first time we got a glimpse of the snow and the Sierra and where we would be heading later that day. So it was kind of an exciting moment to get it all in grasp. And of course, it's always disconcerting when you're at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon and you realize, we need to go run and hike all the way up to about halfway up to what you're seeing there. But that's what we do. So the next thing we did, and I'm going to have Tim describe this and I'll run the film, is this is coming from here. We had to go up and down a few times in order to get to here. And it's called Steep Hollow. And I'll roll a little 15-second video of us going down first. And you can see there really is no trail. It's just a bunch of down trees. And Tim, why don't you take it from here?
Yeah, this was probably the trickiest part. Even though we had to just kind of find our own way, there was no trail. We could go anywhere we wanted. Trying to find a safe route was really a challenge. They call it Steep Hollow because it's really steep down to the bottom, and then there's Steep Hollow Creek, and then up the other side. You can see where we're just trying to figure out the best route. Elka's out in front of me, and my son Austin was embedded with us there doing some video work. But just finding, a really, manageable place here gives you an idea how steep it is going up in areas. You're trying to cut across one of those power lines, goes over the top of these, so you have to descend to the bottom, get to the bottom where the drainage is, and then go back up the other side. And this was really a very interesting place because This was an area where the relief party almost lost all of their animals. They had had several days of rain, such that when they left Johnson Ranch, it was a mud pile. When they got to here, the water, they said, was 100 feet wide and 20 feet deep. This is a little video of what it was like on one of our scouting trips. It was much higher here than the day that we went through, but you get an idea what you're dealing with on a rainy day.
It's exciting. No wonder they almost drowned the horses in here.
So being down at the bottom here, you can see now we're at the bottom looking up at where we need to go at the top of that burn, up on top of that hill. And this is some of the footage that Austin got. There's still plenty of water down there, even though it's we had I don't know, 5 weeks of dry weather. And we came out of there on the other side trying to look for the best route out. It's one of the few places going up that you see here that we hadn't scouted. We knew where we had to go because we'd come from the other side. And this thing was just miserable, just a lot of down trees. It was an old burn area where the trees had finally fallen down, brush had grown in between it. So what looks like about, less than a half a mile took us 45 minutes to kind of find our way through this. It's kind of nice. Bob took the first pole and then we kind of cycle through, so nobody has to do all the route finding to a certain degree and whack all the stuff out of the way. But you can get an idea how tedious this is. The thing that you're trying to avoid here is slipping and falling and getting skewered by one of these tree limbs that are hanging out there and they've been snapped off. So yeah, this was the part we knew would be interesting, and we knew where we had to go because the next T marker we were looking for was right at the top of the power line that was on the east side of Steep Hollow. So this is what we had to deal with, not too long after lunch. This is about 2 o'clock in the afternoon where we're trying to climb up this little ridge. And you can see down to the bottom of Steep Hollow there. And now we're looking up at the power poles, and we know that the marker is right there at the poles. So yeah, this was probably the most, other than a little bit of snow section, this was the part that was really the crux of one of the big cruxes of the trip. Now that we've been through there, Bob and I really want to go back and do some more exploring there. There's got to be some other stories to be had in that hollow. And like I said, the relief party almost lost all their animals there. They tried to cross the water and some of them got swept downstream. Then they had to drop trees so they could get the animals across, but they spent an entire day there just trying to get the animals across the water.
One rut nut. Oh, look at that. Way to go, Bob. Where's the archaeologist? Bob, let's see it. Indiana Jones would be proud. Oh yeah, I think that's an authentic 1847 special. Rut nuts unite.
More like 1947 from the power line. But you'll see here at the end, Tim got some souvenirs. We all got souvenirs. Tim got it the worst. He
oh yeah, there goes my leg modeling career. My shoes are just tight since the bottom.
So all good fun for day 2, and we still had about another 10 miles to go after this. So you can see our photographer Austin and what he had to deal with, schlepping all that gear, and that's what we came from down at the bottom. So this is a climb up to what's called Camel's Hump. And when you get to the top, you're rewarded with a sofa. Don't ask us why, but there was a sofa there that we plopped ourselves down on. But more importantly, you get this view. And what Tim is pointing to is looking back over where we just came. So you can see the cut from the power line, which we were zigzagging around, and then a precipitous drop right in here. And that's what going down was. And we came up the other side. So that's a good look at kind of what the terrain looked like that we had just been through. And then a long, long day. This was another 25+ mile day for us. And so this is heading up the dirt road to camp. And we were greeted by, I think, chili that night. And of course, the go-to for us is Shackleton whiskey. Many of you probably heard Shackleton's boat, the Endurance, was discovered just days ago on the 5th of March, literally to 100 years to the day that Ernest Shackleton was buried at South Georgia Island. They found his boat, a tremendous different expedition that we would have all loved to have been on, but we admire Shackleton and we drink lots of Shackleton to keep us warm at night. So that ends day 2, and I'll probably have Tim pick up day 3 here for us. And yeah, let's go, Tim.
Yeah, so this is where it starts getting exciting. You're on some place called Lowell Hill Road, and you stay on that road for quite a while. But what's interesting here is we left the camp after a brisk morning of oatmeal and things, and here we are at is that, can't read that one right there.
Yeah, that's Truckee Trail. That's along Lowell Hill Road.
Yeah, along Lowell Hill Road. And what's interesting here is there are a couple places as you climb, you slowly climb up to where you're at Bear Valley and Highway 20. There's probably 2 or 3 vistas here where when you look out, you're looking up. Oh, there's the outhouse we ran into. Isn't that fun? We decided to take a little break there. There was all these funny sayings on the wall. So we just figured we better get a picture here. That was out in the middle out near Bear Valley. But there's a couple places along Lowell Hill Ridge where you can look back and see right up the throat of the Sierras. And this is where on the relief party, they had kind of a little bit of a mutiny in here. Here's us coming across Bear Valley after finishing to the top of Lowell Hill Road, then dropping into Bear Valley and then coming across this large field here. That'll give you an idea what they did. And this is where the relief party had a little bit of a mutiny. You know, they'd started with 14. And they left a couple of the youngsters back to watch the animals at Mule Spring, which we would have finished in our second day. And the 2 older fellas, Eddie had tried to come back on first relief. You know, he had been on the Forlorn Hope. So he was just kind of a physical wreck. He made it to Mule Spring and then realized he just couldn't go on due to the depth of the snow and the ruggedness of the terrain. So he and another gentleman went back. That left them 10. So 10 had come all the way here near Bear Valley. This is the T marker right off Highway 20 looking into Bear Valley. And they had a bit of a mutiny here. Of the 10 gentlemen that were left, 3 of them refused to go on due to the difficulty of the terrain. And they thought it was a suicide mission. You're going to get up into the snow and you're just going to get lost and get crushed. And so 3 of them turned back at that point. So what started as 14 is now down to 7. And that's the 7 that continued. You know, that's just those guys are the real heroes of this story, to be able to press on in conditions that were pretty severe, and they're hauling all the food and all the provisions to get up to the lake. This is probably the trickiest section we had to deal with as far as you know, uncomfortable and risky. It was a really icy, shaded slope we had to try across. We had dropped down into the trees a little
Really
bit.
good line, Jen. One step, very slow.
If we could do that, but the tree wells were even worse than what we were up here on the ridge. So we just had to traverse across this. It took us probably an hour to do, you know, what, a quarter of a mile. The trick here is, you know, we had different pieces of footwear with us. You can see Jen had her snowshoes. I had snowshoes. Elka was using micro spikes, which is actually probably the right piece of foot equipment here. And Bob was filming it. This is the end of day 3, going over Cisco Butte, one of the last big climbs of the day. We're back on the normal immigrant route now once we had reached Eagle Lakes Road. So this is back now near the freeway.
Boy, this has been a long day. This is a tough hill, and fortunately or unfortunately, this is one of the easier ones. So the girls are killing it. Tim's already up and over. Me next.
And so our third night, we finished on the road. Third night, we planned to camp on the backside of Rainbow Lodge. So this is the final, you know, mile and a half heading up Donner Pass Road, trying to get to the finish of day 3. You can see the attire, even walking, we've got puffies on and beanies and gloves and whatnot. So even on the road on what looks like a pretty nice day. And it was almost dark when we got in. It was about 5:20. That evening, we had quite a nice chance to get inside, thanks to some folks there. And we had, you know, 2 absolute experts on the Donner Party do a little bit of a kind of a debrief. That's Dan Rosen, who you saw in the video at the beginning at Johnson Ranch, and Frank Mullen next to him in front of the fireplace. And this was a chance for us to ask them questions. These guys are the scholars of the Donner Party. We're kind of reenactors, people, but it was just an hour plus of just great dialogue between these 2 guys, the Donner Party, and what it meant to American history. And then, of course, we exited the lodge and camped out in the snow that night.
So this is the kind of terrain, a lot of hilly gullies like this, heading up now to what is Royal Gorge for day 4. Of course, you come across, many of you that have hiked in that area may have seen this sign. It's actually in the wrong place. It's historically not correct, but it's been there for decades. And it's supposedly near there is where Charles Stanton, the leader of the Forlorn Hope, is buried. not so. We discovered it was actually put there by, it looked like a Boy Scout troop. So Boy Scouts, we give them a lot of points for a great looking sign, but their research was a little dodgy. This is us coming up into Royal Gorge, beautiful area, and hiking across. And ultimately, we got to Donner Ski Ranch at the end of the day. And this fellow here, his name's Chris, and he had come from, I'm not sure where he came from, but he showed up at Mule Springs, and he followed us the whole way. You can see he actually put, using duct tape, 175 years to commemorate the event. And he'd pull his little caravan here. And so he greeted us with a nice musical interlude.
Oh, wait till we cut him loose with Alice tonight.
He's an old bluegrasser. That evening at Donner Ski Ranch, we had the privilege of putting back on our period gear and taking on the persona of John Stark, William Eddy, John Pierce Rhodes, and Reason Tucker. And we're joined by Caleb Greenwood, which was Frank Mullen. And we sat at the front and all dressed up, and people in the audience acted like a press corps, and they asked us questions from 1847. So we had to stay in character, and then later on they switched over and asked us some questions about the expedition. It was really a fun evening, fantastic event. And then we headed back out into the cold and the snow. It was in the 20s. Before that, we met this fellow. This is Josh Gates. Now, the Discovery Channel had reached out to us, and they wanted to do a episode about the Forlorn Hope and Relief Party. So they joined us on the evening, Thursday evening. And this is Josh getting into his period gear. And that night, after we did the event inside, we went outside and went back into the snow. You can see our tents and things set up back here. And this was a nice little campfire. And that's Josh there interviewing us. And they did a little interview across the fire. It was a couple of hours of interviewing, and it was really fun to have his crew, the crew from Discovery Channel there, and join us. So. And then most importantly, we had a Donner Relief Ale, which is, that's Breaking Bud underneath it from Knee Deep, but we put a wrapper on it and had a commemorative ale to, because that's what you do when you have an expedition. You got to have a commemorative ale. So that ended day 4, and then we're on the home stretch here, Tim. So let's start out with day 5.
Yeah, so I just one little think about how the relief parties felt. That we did sleep outside that night at 7,200 feet in the middle of February, and this is where you get to realize how hard it was for those guys to break camp on a day when you wake up and you can't tie your shoes because you got mittens on or your hands are frozen. What those guys did on their trip is they would build a platform to build a fire on, and then huddle around that platform all night, either crouched down or standing up with their blanket on them. That's all they had with them was one blanket. So this is where, we can try to describe what we experienced, but trying to put ourselves in the relief party is really a challenge, but you really get an appreciation for what those guys had to go through to get out. This is a group picture of the whole group. So we had actually added 3 more folks to our team. There was 4 that started at Johnson. We had Josh Gates from Expedition Unknown. We had my son, Austin, who went from photographer to pioneer. And we also had Jen's daughter, Sophia, as there were 7 that arrived at the lake on the first relief. So we decided we'd want 7 people. So this is up on the pass, and you can see, we're there and they're asking questions and filming with multiple cameras. Okay, now stand this way, say that thing again. Now say it with passion. Now, it was really funny because there was a time on the day before where Jen was having a difficult time saying heroism. And, every time she'd say it, she hesitated a bit. It's like, no, one more time. Now with passion, now with feeling. And it was really pretty funny. Once you get on camera, it's a little tricky. So this is us coming down the pass, kind of a nice day, beautiful sunshine, very cold at the top. Yet as we started moving, things warmed up. And we just found our way down the pass. It did take a long time because with TV cameras and microphones and drones and everything else that was going on, it probably took us a couple hours longer than it should have, but it was worth the trip. This is the shot from us at Forlorn Hope on the left when we were leaving, going up the hill with our snowshoes, and back in December of 2020. And this is a similar shot, us coming down Donner Pass Road on the side of the lake. We thought would be fun to put together. And this is the 7 arriving at Donner State Park and the museum there, headed towards the monument. And this is us laying down our tribute cards. Everybody in the 7 that came, we had a handful of tribute cards to honor all reliefs. So we know that there were actually 4 reliefs that found the monument, or found the people. There was, first relief, second relief with James Reed, third relief with Stark, and fourth relief when they cleaned up all what was left there and pulled Keysburg out, and last relief. And we laid those down in front of the marker. This is us after we're done. And one of the really fun things we got to do afterward was to do like a little bit of a debrief, what it was like and how it went. And Bill Odegies from the Donner Historical Society emceed, as well as the state park folks. And it was really cool to be able to kind of recount what we had seen. And again, we had Frank Mullen with us to answer questions a little bit more deep on the Donner Party that we might not necessarily been able to cover. Now, this is a true relic of the Donner Party. We before we left, the week before we went on our trip, we contacted some Donner Party descendants. Donna Deal, descendant of the Graves family, and I can't remember the other woman's name, but she was a descendant of the Donner Party. As you know the story, when Elizabeth Graves left, Mama Graves left the lake, she was afraid the people were the relief guys were going to steal her money, so she buried it at the lake, and it was found decades later by just regular guys rummaging around the lake. This is one of those coins that she left behind. If you look up real close, you'll see, I think it says 1842. This has been passed down through the family as a souvenir, and it's handed down from one to the other. And the interesting part was the way they knew these were from the Donner Party is when they had these coins, the children would use the coins to teeth on. And so the coins had been rubbed down from this teething, and that's how they knew when they found the coins that they belonged to the Donner Party, and the money was split. That's Babas and us enjoying a little finish. And if you haven't had a chance to pick up Bill Odegies' book on the Donner Party that looks at the heroes of the story rather than the tragedy, you should check out this little read. It covers the heroes of the Forlorn Hope trip as well as the relief parties.
Yeah, you can get it at the Donner Summit Historical Society. I think there's still some available. Judy and Dave, who were part of the Intrepid team that supported us, they took on a huge effort on the media and the support and arrangements and logistics. So we can't pass along enough gratitude to these 2 stellar individuals. They actually really made it all happen for us. So that is the Donner Relief Expedition. The last question before we go to questions was what's next, and we will continue to do expeditions. We're going to go back to Camp of Death, which is what this is, and we're going to hopefully do a archaeological search there this summer. We did discover the only artifact that would have been there was an axe head that they lost while they were chopping wood during the miserable 3 days that they were there. Unlikely anybody would find that, but son of a gun, that's us holding indeed what we think is a period axe head that we did discover and where we think Camp of Death is. So we're now going to go in with an archaeological team and the Discovery Channel and see whether what we're holding in our hand is actually a relic from that period, or maybe it's from mining or railroad or something else. We don't know yet, but we're excited to get back in there and continue the story. And we'll do that with Expedition Unknown and Josh. So that's just one of the many things that we're talking about. We'll be meeting with Judy and Dave and others here soon about other expeditions in the area. We're really, we love the idea of discovering and combining history with athletics. So we're hopefully just getting going is what we call history trail trekking. So Ellen, that's it from us.
Wonderful. Really enjoyed hearing about the planning and the execution of the trip. Did you find conflicting info as you planned the expedition, and how did you reconcile it if you did?
Yeah, all the time. The primary research, so that would be diaries or newspaper articles that were given firsthand, or one of the survivors possibly talking to a friend and then putting that in a diary. there were conflicting primary accounts. And then as it got into the press and into books, lots of liberties were taken with regard to where the trail was, what they did, what the dates are, what the terrain looks like, who did what to whom. Part of the challenge and the reason it takes us so long to do the work is we can find accounts, but we don't know whether it's the real account or the true account. And really, until you go into the field and step where they describe they were standing and see what they saw, can you begin to eliminate some of the highly unlikely, impractical routes that could have possibly been taken. And so I'd say 90% of the time we're eliminating things and 10% of the time we're actually confirming.
Yeah. What quantity of supplies made it all the way to Donner Lake?
Well, I think like I said, they were down to 7 relief members by the time they got to the lake. And there was, again, here's another varying accounts of how much weight those guys were carrying, but probably somewhere between 30 and 50 pounds. Some people more than less, depending on how capable they were. And so, you got to think that sounds like a lot, but when you're going to the lake, they had probably 70 people still there they had to feed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, all you could carry wasn't going to be much more than a day or two of supplies when you think you got to feed 70 people.
Yeah.
Usually your backpack on a backpacking trip is just for you. And
Mm-hmm.
these guys are carrying food for 70. That's why they had to turn around as quickly as they could and get moving because, they really didn't have that much supply to distribute.
And did they have any equipment with them when they had to part from their animals? I mean, I saw you guys had snowshoes and trekking poles.
They tried a couple of times to make snowshoes out of pine bough, and it didn't work. The snow was too deep. We were reading an account today that William Eddy gave that at one point he found a place where the snow was open down to a stream, and he was able to drop a string down there, and it was 65 feet deep.
Oh my goodness.
So
wow.
You can imagine just it didn't matter what you had on your feet. The best way was someone would break the trail and then you would follow in their footsteps. And then after 5 or 10 minutes, someone would rotate out and take the lead because the lead is exhausting. It's a lot easier to step in someone else's footsteps. And that's the method that they predominantly used to get all the way once they hit snow, which was around Mule Springs. So they had 50 plus miles of deep snow, an amazing feat. And we should remind everyone that we just went one way. The relief party, first relief, 4 days later, turned around, rescued 23 people. So now they're responsible for 23 people with very few provisions. And they turned right back around and went right back to Wheatland. So 200 miles in the most god-awful conditions, done over a few weeks and responsible for 23 people, most of which were broken down and starving to death. And many of them were children. So just think of how hard that must have been.
Yeah. Some of the accounts said the men just carried a tin cup, a hatchet, and their blanket. That was what they carried for themselves. And when you get out there, you realize just how important fire is. Because, every night they had to dry their clothes and they had to get warm, and they had to do that before it got dark, right? You're not going to go out there and start chopping trees at, 9 o'clock at night in the dark and then build a platform and get all your food cooked and eaten. It's just really interesting how important that was every night for them.
What did you learn about the sort of the body types and fitness levels of the folks who did this?
That's what is so remarkable, Ellen. And the title of this is, ordinary people doing extraordinary feats, right? They were, most of the people that were in the relief party were immigrants. They'd come over in September, October. So they'd traveled 2,000 miles with their family and then volunteered to do this just months later. Needless to say, these were pretty emaciated people that had little to no belongings other than the clothing on their back. And so it tells us a lot about the mettle, right? The grittiness of the people back in the 1800s that were pioneers that came out west, women and men and children for that matter. Because remember, a lot of people think everybody rode in the wagon trains. They were doing 15 to 20 miles a day on foot. Nobody rode in the wagon trains unless they were sick. So imagine, getting your children together every morning at 6 a.m., 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them, and saying, okay, kids, here we go. We're going to, walk another 15 miles today in the dust and the grime and in the heat and the god awful conditions, and do that over and over again for about 6 months. That's the mettle of the people. That's what they did. And it tells us volumes about not just physically what they were capable of, but mentally the toughness that they had.
Yeah, a couple of you think it, oh, well, the people that made it through rather than the Donners, they were the only ones that didn't make it through that year. But the people that did make it through, it wasn't like some kind of party the whole way. The Rhodes family had gotten separated somewhere out in the desert, and they had arrived at Johnson Ranch and had to go back and get the rest of their family. And they were out of provisions at that time. And they arrived at Johnson Ranch October 1st. So that gives you an idea how much farther behind the Donners were, because the Donners and the Rhodes had gone together all the way to Hastings Cutoff. And the Rhodeses decide, well, yeah, we don't really want to go do that newfangled route. We're going to take the old reliable. And it was the Donners that took the risky route and paid for it. The other one that that's an example is Curtis, who was at the Johnson Ranch and went out on first relief and was one of the guys who bailed on the relief party at Bear Valley. He was the last one probably over the pass before the Donners got stuck. And when Reed and McCutcheon went back to try to get provisions of them in November, they were out. I can't remember, Bob, was it Bear Valley or someone?
Bear Valley, yeah.
Cooking their dog. They were down to their last provisions was their dog. That was all they had left.
Infamous line, McCutcheon, 6'5", 260-pound giant of a man, sat feeding on the dog, and he turned to Reed and said, "This is mighty fine dog."
Though it is funny, though, you asked that question, that John Stark was a mountain of a man from those times, who Bob was representing, 6'2", 240, which is, you can kind of understand how he was able to manage children. And even the person that I represent, John Pierce Rhodes, he had brought his whole family over, and he was a large man too. They called him Big John, and he was the one who carried Naomi Pike 40 miles from the lake to Mule Spring. Because Harriet Pike had gone out on the on the Forlorn Hope, gotten to Johnson, and probably talked to Rhodes. They were both Mormons. And so I'm sure Harriet, after having lost her husband in a shooting accident, in a firearm accident out in the desert, and then had to leave her 2 young children behind at the lake, when they finally Rhodes finally made it back to the lake, one of the children had died, and he said, "Oh, I'll carry her out." So he literally, you think it was hard to get to the lake? How about Rhodes and Stark carrying children on their back all the way back to Mule Spring in the snow? Yeah, these guys were crazy.
Compare and contrast the weather that you experienced in 2022 versus what it was like in 1847.
It's unfair, because other than the fact that we had some snow on the ground, and we didn't have snow at Mule Springs, we didn't pick it up until really Bear Valley. The depth of the snow and the amount of miles that we had to travel through snow was far, far less than what they encountered. The temperatures were similar, not all that dissimilar, but they also encountered 36 hours of straight rain when they left Johnson Ranch and got to Steep Hollow, which is why it was such a huge raging river. And they were soaked. So they literally walked off that ranch that you saw pictures of, and it proceeded to nonstop rain. They said it was a hurricane for 36 hours. And the little bit of blankets that they had on them were completely soaked, and as were the provisions. So they had to keep stopping and air out the provisions, because if it gets rot, right, and mold in it, what good is it if you carry it 100 miles and then you can't feed anybody on it? So they had all these other things that complicated their lives. And there's no comparison. The only thing that we can even remotely appreciate is the views that they saw and the terrain that they were on. We were on that terrain. And I'll tell you, it was very hard for us as amateur athletes to encounter it. And it just makes you shake your head as to how, in God's name, they could have done it, and did it for perfect strangers. These were not people, for the most part, that were going back for relatives. They were going back to help other immigrants that they might have met on the trail, maybe didn't, and risking their own lives on behalf of these people right after they had just arrived themselves after a harrowing 2,000-mile trip for their own. So I don't, I don't know. Do we have that kind of metal today in our world? I don't know, but it's just absolutely amazing.
So you guys did part of the trek in period attire and then switched. Just imagine that 36 hours of rain and having to warm up, not in tech quick dry, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Wow. All right, just filtering through, had a whole bunch of questions come in. Are there any particular anecdotes of sort of the extraordinary feats that you didn't get a chance to share that you'd like to share with the group?
You might want to tell one about Eddie, Tim, what his turnaround was.
Yeah, I mean, William Eddy was the only guy to reach Johnson Ranch in the Forlorn Hope. He was a bloody, emaciated mess when he got there, and then they had to go and retrieve the other 6, which were kind of sunk down out near Campfire West somewhere. But then in less than 2 weeks, he made the turnaround to go back with first relief, and then it was just too hard for him, and they sent him back. But then he went again on third relief, which wasn't, maybe it's 3 or 4 weeks later. But here's a guy who, went to, I don't know, 1,800, 1,900 miles, then did a 100-mile trek in snow, made it to Johnson, and then was interested in going right back 2 weeks later, which is, mind-boggling. I know that they said that when Mary Graves got to the Forlorn Home, got to Johnson Ranch, she could put on a pair of shoes for 3 months.
Wow.
And he did the same trek. So he's going back up the mountain. That's why Jen, she had taken on the persona of William Eddy just because that guy was, unstoppable. And then he went back on third relief, right? And third relief were the guys that found everyone stuck in starved camp. Saw that. Then he went all the way down to the lake, went out to the Donner camp, came back, and they turned around and went right back. I mean, that guy was, he's superhero and on both trips, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you know
the
when...
one that I was noting to Bob earlier, realized, how important the Forlorn Hope was, right? Because they got to Johnson and got to the lake before the second relief, which would have made it there without, because Reed was the one driving that. He knew they were stuck there. But if they hadn't gotten there, you would have had the entire pool of 23 that went out on first relief going about and getting stuck in the storm that the second relief got stuck in starved camp. That could have turned into a super tragedy had the Forlorn Home not gotten out and first relief not gotten in. You would have been stuck with just the second relief with Reed, and he would have been struggling trying to get anybody through there. They might have had to retreat back and had even worse outcomes than what happened.
We've estimated that 25 more people would have perished in the time between when first relief arrived and second relief arrived. First relief arrived because of the Forlorn Hope. So if it hadn't been until the second relief, we think 25 more people would have died at the lake. And when you run the sort of actuarial table on that, that's about 25,000 people in California that were born as a result of the Forlorn Hope breaking through.
Well, and that was one of the highlights of that little press conference we had after the trip. We got to that and we made a note about it. And then someone in the audience just broke in and said, "Hey, is there anybody here that could be, a credit to the Forlorn Hope and first relief?" And there were like 4 or 5 hands that went up. It said,
Wow.
we were descendants of someone that was on Forlorn Hope or first relief in some way. And we're like, wow, you don't expect to see that. It was really cool.
Well, this is such an interesting conversation. I hate to cut things off. I'm going to end with 2 sort of next steps questions. Do we know when the Discovery Channel program is going to air?
We will let you know. It'll probably be this fall. They have to
Okay.
come back and do some shoots at Camp of Death and Johnson Ranch, but it'll be in their next season, upcoming season. It's a show called Expedition Unknown on the Discovery Channel.
Okay. And the second question, help me pick my next big book club pick. Which one do we pick?
Well, wow, there's so many choices. I'll tell you, we'd recommend that Bill Ordergeist wrote that little booklet. It's only about 40, 50 pages. I would pick that for book club because it's an easy read. Everyone will read it. And it's packed full of stories and it's from a local person. So we recommend that one.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This has been so interesting. Definitely have some follow-up reading to do. And to all of you who are watching, just a reminder, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. You'll get reminded that we get together the second Monday of the month every month. So thank you all for your participation.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
for
the
having
invite.
us.